also keep a lot of his song books, or like his publications, or like this booklets where he kept his lyrics. And these are the title pages, always parental advisory. The profane language was a big problem for him, but he used it to curse the demons in his head. So he was actually himself a very, very sweet person, but a lot of the songs use quite strong language in order to kind of like cope with what's going on in his head. And these are, after a while he would start to go to Kinko's and type them on a computer, but these are the older handwritten ones, and they all share the same structure. And it's very interesting because the first thing you see, these are the presets on the keyboard. So it's C170, which is, I guess, a certain rhythm and a melody. And then most of the time it's about the person. There's always 4 lines, and then there's the chorus, which is repeated 3 times. In between, like, there's a bit of info about the person, like now Schwarzenegger's his favorite movie star. And then often afterwards comes his corporate slogan, rock over London, rock on Chicago. And then is a bit of advertising. In that case, the alley Chicago, it's the alternative shopping complex. And what I found so brilliant is that he kind of, while listening to the radio, he just figured that there's always a song and then advertising, a song and advertising, and he just thought, okay, let's just take the advertising into the song and just add it at the end. So every Wesley Willis song has a bit of advertising at the end. Run for the border. Burger King is where the burgers are flame broiled, not fried. Yeah. There's one episode also in a documentary video on YouTube where you find Cello Biafra saying, like, he refers to the directness of what Wesley was communicating. And to me, this is also one of the things that I find so much joy in, even after all these years of like carrying this project around. I still think the way this is written and the way how direct and maybe also naive is so sweet. And also often very precise and to the point. He's not taking any detours. So, Snoop Doggy Dogg. You can really rap your ass off. Tom and Jerry. I think I have quite many. I also just like them typographically because they somehow reflect the structure of the song as well. And then there are also songs which are a bit more sad, or also self-referential, where he talks about his illness or about his financial situation. This one, is just about having no money and how it sucks to have no money. Then this one is also interesting if you listen to the song. It is... he chose a much, like, whereas a lot of the funny songs, Schwarzenegger and whatever, are quite jolly in their tune. This one is much more in minor, and is very sad also to listen to. And here he just speaks about his disease. There's others as well when he has an outburst. And I mean, I don't know, I guess for us people here in Western Europe this is hard to imagine, but he was this big, tall, black guy, schizophrenic, poor, working on the street, spending a lot of time on the street, and of course it's a miracle that he managed to keep himself out of jail and out of institution, and this was always his biggest achievement in life, that he could sustain himself with his art and with his music. This one I like a lot, where he's talking about how he's drawing. I have a little video later where he's speaking about how he works. And then, we just have hundreds and hundreds of those. And
My name is Wesley Willis, working man of the city, the man of doing a good art, and I do it every day. As I work so hard on these lines, I'm just doing it every day, just like grease lightning. I like to wander around on the loop, and I like to ride around on the loop, getting that art done, like a flock of these headings off. I just sit down in my chair, tell the people how I get these arts done, and I just sit on my bench. I sit on my chair and preach off a lot to a lot of folks about it, and that's how my sales always get underway and significant. I started doing this ever since 1976, in which I've been doing scenes of the city for at least 12 years. And momentarily, since I've been doing this type of art for as many as a long time, and I mean, I've been doing too well always to mean to keep it up. My drawings always look decent. I do scenes from the scenes of the Dam Line, the scenes of the skyline buildings in Chicago, some from the river, some from any other point to Chicago I go around, or all over the view. But as many times as I've been doing this, I'm just gonna keep it up. I'm just gonna keep on doing great on a lot of these. Something around 5 drawings a day. I use ink pen on the boards first making the drawings, and after I get the art done, I just get my markers out and drape it in color.
So I really like here how he talks about his way of working, how he makes them in public, how he speaks to people, how he tries to sell them, that he makes 5 of them per day, and you can also see how he's actually producing them. That he first has this kind of ballpoint skeleton that he then colors in with his marquees. And as you also saw before, it's very labor intense to make the kind of the architecture and the landscape and everything. And then when he comes to the sky, he often gets lazy. He just makes a bunch of really huge clouds, so you need to color them in, and they stay white. But apart from these big drawings, he also had a bunch of really nice kind of merch ideas, I think. One was just watch faces that he would do, or sometimes he would buy a watch and alter it or redesign it. And in the next video, you're going to see something that when you look at these big cityscape drawings for a bit longer, you see that there are all kinds of really fantastic cars in there, and he speaks about those.
When I look at a lot of buildings and look at a lot of these moving cars and all that, and when I see those trucks going west to get on the expressway, that's what catches my eye. The view always look me in the eye when I'm seeing a lot of this and that happening. The trucks, the buses, and all the traffic going by and all the wheels go around. As I watch the wheels go around, I keep a lot of this work up every day. And I like it the most, and I like it very best. The best of luck is always the best of ink pens, like the best foods, fast times of Burger King. While I draw, I think about some dream cars in me. Like if I make those 2-story cars up in my mind, or make those two stories designable cars, or those two-story painting vans in my mind, make some cars which are called a harpoon or whatever, or one called the James Howell in my mind. That's just one of my favorite dream cars I made up. Sometimes I make a three-story Matty Yates. Sometimes I make a three-story Hill Climber Special, and sometimes I make three-story Fiats, which is already a car. Sometimes I put those mine good cars in their car, the fallopian, and I make some cars are called the Foden, the Spiegel, the Whiskaletti, and the Electro C. I tell a lot of folks about my made-up models, and they like all the made-up models. And I tell you, they like all my cars that I made up in my mind, and they like it all that I draw on that board. I've never been to art school in my life, but I've been working so hard in this city since the time I got myself into looking at them buildings and drawing hard on them. Traffic, expressway, road, etc. Doing so well in a lot of this grateful, good talent, I will keep this type of powerful drawing up in my means of luck. Sometimes monetary only something for 10 or 20 bucks. But the meantime, when I do a lot of this great art and getting it done in the town, just having good luck, I love it. Only some really for 10 or 20. 10 bucks is always that I sell them for.
So then we were kind of lucky, or mostly Giovanni was lucky, that he got a job as a director of the Kunsthalle St. Gallen in 2006, and he decided to make his first show 2006, and his first show in 2008 when he started there was Wesley Willis, or it was called WW versus Grrr. And Grrr is the pseudonym of Ingo Giesendanner, who is an artist from Zurich, who's also obsessively drawing cityscapes. And so Giovanni's kind of curatorial idea for the first exhibition in this new space was to let these two positions collide. Just a bunch of slides from the exhibition, and I think it worked really well. And what I especially liked about it is that, of course, many people would label Wesley as an outsider artist, but in this show, or the way this show was being done, it was never the question of what is outside or what is inside, but he would be treated as a similar artistic position than the one of Ingo. So it was by not labeling him as an outsider and by not contextualizing him together with other outsiders, I think this was a very nice way of also getting, like, from an art or curatorial or art historian perspective to get this work out of this kind of strange niche that it also can be when you always operate with these terms. So, I mean, the whole exhibition was really kind of hallucinogenic, because there was so much, the visual material was so immensely dense, and I think it was very enjoyable. And then we started to first publish autonomous little things that were concerned with Wesley. So Giovanni said, okay, we have a bit of budget in the context of the show, let's make a little 16 pages or whatever it was, 24 pages publication to just have something. Because of course, always after we experienced how much material there is, the big aim always was to make a book. And so this was a first kind of appetizer. And then, I guess, due to Swiss funding structures and due to Pro Helvetia, this exhibition could also travel to Egypt, to a museum that has a rather peculiar name, Mohammed Mahmoud Khalil and his wife museum. And Giovanni in his budget had like a bit of extra for an installer helper guy, and he asked me if I want to come there, and I was like, yeah, sure. Never been to Egypt, and yeah, I guess from the perspective of exhibition making, you could consider it as a kind of a difficult space. There's nothing in the middle, but it's huge. There's no windows. There's a strange ceiling, and there's a lot of like really big pillars. And yeah, this is also where we learned that not all of these Wesley drawings are actually 70 by 100, but they were all like slightly different, just like 1 centimeter off here and there. And then we had measured them and cut the glass, and then when the cut glass came from the glass cutter guy, it was all perfect, but it had Arabic numbers on it. So for us, it took like an insane amount of time to just figure out, okay, which glass fits to which Wesley piece. And Ingo was there working directly on the wall. And I mean, it was a really bizarre experience, but also very enjoyable. You can see here some bad documentation pictures. Then the Minister of Culture was cutting a ribbon, and of course, totally different crowd than from a Swiss opening. But for instance, one thing that was nice was that again, this guy John Stuhlgate took benefit of the opportunity and traveled to Cairo and showed again like a lot of support for his old friend Wesley. And I like this kind of strange discontextualization of a Wesley drawings in the Egyptian desert. And then we again published some sort of an appetizer. This was called 2001. This was a collection of unfinished drawings, just pieces that Wesley prepared with ballpoint, but somehow, due to whatever reasons, never managed to finish. And then we thought, okay, we have to take this seriously, and of course this is a self-initiated project and you never have time or money to really get around doing it, but Linus and Giovanni and I, we sat down and we tried to kind of come up with something that we thought at the time would be a good way to present Wesley's work. It's called Drawn by Wesley Willis, and it was just like a mock-up. I'm going to go through very quickly because in retrospect I find it kind of poor and also I guess the wrong way to present this kind of material, because it implies too much structure. Because what we did is basically we cataloged. I think it's actually valid as a pre-study for maybe a later book, but I think as a book itself it doesn't really work. We basically structured and archived all his material according to different kind of basically we made typologies, unfinished work at the seafront. These are like big black skyscrapers, baseball stadiums, more baseball stadiums by night, and so on and so forth. And we sent this around, and we're trying to just get to basically land a deal with the publisher. Which eventually also kind of happened. This is an email from 2008 from somebody at Princeton Architectural Press. And for a while we had a really long kind of communication with them, because in the beginning everything was possible. And then they, after negotiating for a year about the dimensions of the book and everything, they started also to feel the results of the financial crisis and everything, and the book kept getting smaller and smaller, and the page count kept getting less and less, and So at one moment we kind of decided to stop this because we thought that it was, they still wanted to do it, but it was so far away from how we imagined this that we kind of thought, okay, this is not going to go anywhere, we're just going to stop it. And in retrospect, I have to say, I was kind of happy that we stopped it because, yeah, as I just mentioned right now, I think if it would have this form, then I guess it's, yeah, I would maybe be unsatisfied with the result. And that's the end of the story. Is that I then, at the same time, 2008, started my own publishing, Rollo Press, first using risograph and later just whatever printing method. And I kind of thought, okay, I mean, in a way, you actually don't need a publishing house if you have a publishing house on your own. And so I kind of thought, okay, I'll try to do the Wesley book using Rollo. But of course, the lecture still stops at more or less the same frame that it stopped in 2012, where we managed to make a poster. Oops. And I have a bunch of those here. I can show them to you or get them out of the roll. It's a life-size reproduction of a waterfront, of this waterfront drawing, and I use this, for a certain time, I use this to kind of like, just to sell, of course, and make a bit of cash for the project, but of course this also didn't work. But I just now use it to kind of like constantly remind myself that that we should get back together and do this thing. But during more recent discussions and also as a feedback to this talk, we have also come up with a new idea or structure of the book. And I just thought somehow it was interesting because somewhere in the way this conference was announced or this happening, there was the word messiness a bunch of times, or at least it always, I read it as a, 2 times, I read it as a, I think it's a quality that somehow, that we would like to bring into this book more. So we would like to have it maybe more non-linear, and in terms of its planning and production, a bit more messy. And so the idea would be to produce segments of it or signatures of it, without having a plan for the whole thing when we start doing this, which could mean that we this year or next year print like one signature that shows his song text, for instance, or a specific section of his work, or looks at something specific. And whenever there's money or time, one signature would be added, and when the money and time run out, or when the motivation for the project runs out, also the book would be kind of finished. I don't know if this makes sense, but in order to, as a contrast to design the whole book from A to Z and then send it to the printer, is the idea now to design fragments, produce those, and then eventually maybe collect them into a bigger volume. And so, that's it.
You are my favorite movie star. You are my best buddy. You are a low-down rotten man. You are crazy like a road lizard. Arnold Schwarzenegger! Arnold Schwarzenegger! Arnold Schwarzenegger! Arnold Schwarzenegger! You are the greatest. You are my kind of guy. You are my buddy. You are my blessed man.
Maybe somebody has a question? I thought so.
Yes, then we have this as an example. First, I want to say something. I will check with the audience, with everybody participants, if your name is Urs.
True.
Urs, yes. Urs, he make a kind of reference to the lecture before about the Simon sayings that relatives to persons with schizophrenia also are more
Prone? Prone? I don't know. I have no empiric data about all this. I just know that in this case, the two brothers share similar conditions.
Yes, but I think the idea of the research was that the persons in the family are not with the diagnosis, but they are creative. If I make sense? What's it saying? No.
Yeah, I heard that children to people with autistic occupations are more likely to have a schizotype diagnosis.
Yes, so it's not that the idea is I don't want to us to misunderstand the lecture actually. So I think the idea was that it's not that schizophrenia is heritage inherited, that you can get it to your kids or you get from your parents, but people with the diagnosis they have some persons creative in their, but for me it's opposite. I'm really creative, but everybody's healthy in my family. So just a moment, and that this with the sun, yeah, with the clouds. Because of this artist, what's his name? Wesley Billis, you thought that he is like making very detailed the city and the cars and everything, and being lazy with the sky. And I think this is the sky is his escape of being functional. You can see that he's functional because he doesn't feel the skies. Can you help me with this, somebody? You can see in this is really, also those with the buses are even better. You can see that the sky is free. And I've seen, yes, and it's really important because he's also free and fresh and can work. Because if you feel all the surface from top to the edge and everything, then something is wrong. Is my opinion of what I've seen with drawings. And he showed that he was really functional. And this is
I think lazy was definitely the wrong word. I think there was a certain economy to it, but I can tell you another detail. You can maybe see it there on top of this. I think the tower with the red and white antenna on it. This is the Sears Tower, and right on top of it, the color of the sky is changing from quite blue to a bit more lilac, right? And what Wesley would do is he would varnish his drawings, but always only the lower half of it. You know, so this lower part would be protected against the effects of sunlight and stuff. Like here in the cloud, you can also see it. The lower part of this big cloud is a little bit more yellow, and the upper cloud has. And he would like definitely allocate way more like attention and energy to the lower part of the drawing, and the upper is always the kind of
You're gonna speak tomorrow. It's okay. Let's have also some other.
Yes, of course, if somebody has questions, but this is really interesting how he focused on the human creation, actually. He doesn't care about the weather and this kind of stuff. Yes. So I think it's genius. For me, it's really interesting. He was focusing on the artifacts, you know, what is created by man. He doesn't care about the weather.
Thank you. Do you know actually Willis Earl Beale?
Who?
Willis Earl Beale. He's also a Chicago ex-homeless person. No. Draws and makes music like country music.
Oh,
Lo-fi country music. It's like a more recent person, but it's very similar to him.
I mean, the most, or like, I guess, to us, the most famous representative of this, I don't know, field is maybe Daniel Johnson, or like who has had maybe the most success as a musician and also as a visual artist. And I don't know, I have read somewhere that this kind of condition was also referred to as idiot savant or savant syndrome, And I guess maybe Wesley had it to a certain extent, but there are these other examples of people. Like there's this one guy that they always take into a helicopter and then they fly over a cityscape, and then afterwards he's able to reproduce it in such an amount of detail that it's just completely impossible for somebody who doesn't have like a, I don't know, photographic brain. Or,
Questions?
Thank you also for actually thank you for becoming this guy a little bit, because at some point you're talking about someone else's work, and then I think you made it very much
it's a long way to go.
your own. So I don't know if I have a question, but it's more of a comment on you saying it represents a bit of a failure, yet or still of not being able to publish it. But can I ask you, how many times have you done this talk? And how many times have you done this talk?
This talk I think I have now given for the 4th time in a span of 6 years. And I was also thinking at one moment maybe this talk, you know, if I could also work on the talk instead of working on the book. But I still think a book, I don't know, to my understanding, this would be more satisfactory.
I guess my question is, what would you like? Because if you've given it 4 times and it's 50 to 60, maybe 100 people each time, that's very quickly 1,000, which is the basic number of art books. So, you know, you can.
Yeah.
A talk is a publication. You're making it public.
I mean, I was definitely thinking about this as well, but I guess the secret reason behind giving the talk is actually that at one point there's this millionaire patron sitting in the audience and thinking like, okay, I'm going to sponsor this.
How much money do you need? Because here we have 100 people who probably would like to give some money. Yeah, but what you don't have on the internet is maybe Urs's passion. Because, for me, at some point I got a bit suspicious about that Urs is a white Swiss guy who's extremely highly educated in art and design. So what's the connection? And at some point that suspicion just disappears because of the way you talk about it.
I mean, for me, I'm astonished also about this fact that since you're carrying this around for such a long amount of time, but still every time I look at it, I get so excited about this work. So, I mean, I also think it's like really, it has such a unique quality somehow, yeah.
And a talk has an advantage that you can actually play sound, and a book is.
Yeah, yeah. But, you know, for instance, there's a lot of people who know him from like their time in Chicago, and so I think a book would also just go to a different audience than just fans, for instance. And maybe that's just a question of where you give a talk or how you manage to get. That's a lot for a talk.
No more front row.
front row is done.
One thought that I just had, now that you're so excited about the work, or not, like you've been excited about the work for 16 years, right? So sometimes I think if you're so excited about something and then it almost becomes your own, maybe it would be better to give it away. Would that be something you could imagine, or is it that much of a
Never. I haven't thought about this. I mean, if somebody, I guess maybe as in form of collaboration, that would be enjoyable. That, I feel that since we have started this thing, but maybe also, at one point got stuck, or people started to get busy with other stuff, and you have families and move somewhere, whatever, and it becomes more and more difficult to also bring everybody together. So I think one way to reanimate it would be to find new people who are motivated to work on something like this. Or it's either energy or money or both. Or But I'm not sure if I could just feel it like that. Or I'm pretty sure I couldn't right now. Yeah, that's the problem, true.
So you mentioned the collector a couple of times. Do you have any idea what his family thinks about the work you did, or about the exhibitions, or?
No. Wesley's family.
Yes.
No. We just know, I mean, from the people we've met was this guy Ricky and the father, who meanwhile died, and I think the rest of the family is really spread out and not really traceable, or also not, we cannot really communicate with them. Ricky, for instance, I think he was worse off than Wesley in the sense that he couldn't sustain his own life, so he was living with his father in this elderly home in Chicago, and he would be, I don't know, 38, surrounded by all these old people, but somehow there was no, I don't know, I guess he didn't have health care or something, so there was no institution who would keep him otherwise.
And the other question was that, I mean, seeing the exhibitions that you did, or that Giovanni did, there is something a bit conservative about it also, no? I mean, you have this artist that is on the street and really just sells his pictures to people that are interested, he talks to them, and then suddenly he's treated kind of like this artist, and you mentioned this in a way like being something that is it's like accomplished, so he's like, he made it, like he's kind of like equally to the other artists, but then I was just wondering, maybe Wesley Willis wouldn't even want to be there. Like, do you think about that also, or like
this could very well be. I think that's a good point, because also when I look at them, I mean, I guess what Giovanni did was to treat the material as it was. I mean, there's nothing you can do about them. They have the size that they have, and he would sometimes make this. I mean, he would like pile them on top of each other to arrive at a whole wall, and then to kind of collide them with Ingo's work, who was much more multi-layered and video and everything. But I mean, Wesley, I think he would have really liked it, yeah. Just maybe not the exhibition, maybe not the way it looked, but to have this kind of attention and to have an audience was for him the whole thing throughout his whole life. And he also had exhibitions. He made sometimes like little crappy gallery shows, which is like a bunch of drawings hanging along the wall, and he would perform on his keyboard. And I think he was really all up for in a way publishing or putting stuff out there.
Thanks for the very good lecture. So a question in terms of I mean, how do you relate to sort of the realm of intellectual property with this? And you said that he's become famous, and I'm just wondering if there's like any. I mean, like, does his family or father or brother or anything, does he get anything from it, sort of?
The majority of work that we digitized is basically from. I mean, the family has nothing and also no interest in this. And it's also clear that if we would ever manage to make this book, probably financially it would also be like not a gold mine at least. But the majority of sources that we have to work from is basically 3 to 4 people who were friends with Wesley and collected and bought a lot of drawings, sometimes because they liked the drawing, oftentimes also just because Wesley needed money. And so they would kind of, there was the guy who worked at the bank, for instance. Wesley would just know that every time he would go to him, he would make $20, $40, and so this was a kind of a business relationship as well. But all these collectors gave us, I mean, they are also interested in because they were all somehow, they were very supportive of his position when he was alive, and I think they're also all still very supportive of just kind of maintaining the memories of Wesley and his work and what kind of guy he was. So and we have a sort of like a agreement between them, but there's legally I wouldn't know, I guess the copyright, I don't know what this actually is. Yeah.
First, I have to wait for if someone else has a question. Does someone else have a question? emphasized during that.
Front row.
Front row,
I just like to reflect back what I received in ways of understanding your activity, because for me, you're working. For me, in a way, you're working with a person's life world as some sort of profile, or I mean, like those that would work on the crime scene and immerse themselves in a way a life world of someone they try to understand, except that this is a criminal person, it's a schizophrenic person. It's not your world, but you still have this immersive ability, and in a way that you bring this to public interest as something which is part of a contemporary repertoire of someone which is totally unknown, and making it somehow relevant, not as a way to be for others, but a way that exists somehow, that deserves this kind of attention. So I guess this is why you can be wild Swiss doing this in a way, that you provide this amount of attention. I don't know, sometimes people are not working for intellectual property rights and cash, but actually just are working for bringing a public appreciation or a public value to something. That maybe there's something called public value creation somehow. But value creation is not about only about earning money from things, obviously, but that public value creation is something that we can do, and that it kind of relates to the topic of schizotopia, since that is kind of a take on a place which is diverse. So that's the kind of note.
I mean, I guess if I understand correctly, I am completely aware of if you call it public value creation or whatever the term you use for this. I guess like a lot of my work is for pleasure, not for profit. But I think the interesting observation is, and this is also why I think, or like what your first observation, how to make a book about somebody's life, and this person in his way of being and working and kind of like producing things in the world has a certain kind of way or a certain quality in which he did that, and it was in his case maybe outside of the norm or whatever you call the norm, but I think it's very, as a designer, this is where I felt it started to get complicated when we made this first book proposal that implies so much order and structure and linearity and just a kind of like a complete story, which of course it never is. So that was exactly the thing that made us think, like, how could we actually, as designers, work in a way that is more in relation to Wesley's life, to find a way of maybe production and a way of giving a form to this body of work that is closer to him as a person. Because in a way you make like something like a biography, or you sum things up, which is you always cut a lot of stuff short, and it's of course never complete. But that's why I said before also that it should be, I guess, more messy, or in a way more should maybe leave space for chance, or that things could happen in between, that it's not such a strict linear designed planned process. And of course this is also like, I think it's interesting in relation to design, because it's something that also contradicts a lot of ways in which we work usually. You plan something, you conceive it in front of the computer, and somebody else produces it, and these parts are disrupted from each other. And so in that sense, I think at least this has been a new kind of challenge in the project, that this has become like a thing to think about. I don't know if...
Well, the thing is that just about, let's say, our cultural repertoires,
Our cultural repertoires become very narrow if they're not fed by certain alluvials, by persons who are willing to feed those repertoires in a way. So there's an possible impoverishment of our contemporary repertoires if we fail to see this sort of activity, and it can always only be, I think, be conveyed by someone else in this aspect, very rarely by the person, him or herself.
Yeah.
Or yours. You want to continue? Maybe last question?
Yeah, maybe there's one. I mean, I'm kind of happy for so many.
Yeah?
Front row is blocked, but in the back there.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, I just want to say that it's clear that you've spent a lot of time and emotional energy investing in this person, and that you brought that forward a lot. And in the context, it's less a question and more a comment. I think that this is really exciting for me because in the context of this entire conference, the point is to infuse graphic design or to look at how schizophrenia or schizophrenic modes of production can change graphic design, and the fact that you have spent so much time and have already made a quote-unquote mistake or understand maybe a little bit better that a linear book isn't the way to treat this. It seems to me that you're like covering or breaking ground, or somehow this person who you didn't even know is shifting your perception or your work in some way. So I'm just super interested to see how you solve the issue of creating some sort of book based on this.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I mean, the only thing I can say so far is that we try to think in a way that we would work in sections maybe, and like maybe try to find different specific situations in where we can meet and maybe work on one fragment, maybe put this into form, and then so you could say that like a later section of the book could in a way react on an earlier section, you know, that if you already like print the signature, then it's done, you know, and then you have to continue, like you just like start the process by putting one thing out, and then you start to react on this by later sections, and you know, I don't know if this is going to work, because also like this would mean that you would need to somehow, you need space to store earlier printed stuff, and you would need like maybe a print house who is up for something like this, and you could maybe also, I don't know, of course you need money, but you can also work with different printers, for instance, for different parts or something like this. I mean, we haven't, it is just a kind of a, like an idea that maybe sounds nice, but it's in reality a complete nightmare.
No, but I think that was a very good question, and it's also the enlightening aspect of the lecture that I think is also very interesting. But also related to what Maki asked before, or proposed, that which is also connected to my lecture yesterday with what Socrates said about philosophy, that you should not write it down. You can tell stories. And the lecture is another way to show something where you can show the things, and you can get the feedback, and you can discuss things from your idea about Wesley, Phyllis. So maybe the solution of the development in graphic design is not to print things anymore, and to save lots of money, and then also have good experiences together in lectures.
But why then not do it just, I mean, there's, as I said, like a bunch of documentaries on YouTube. You know, I kind of like still feel this inclination to print, because
what's your sickness?
That's my condition, but I somehow have a feeling that this book, I mean, it will hopefully deal with most of his output, but I think it will focus on the visual part, and maybe the music is in there as well, but maybe also as visual artifacts, such as his sheets where he writes down his songs, or the CD covers that he's designing. And so I think when you watch documentaries, they're mostly focusing on the music and not so much about him drawing. So I don't know, that's why I kind of think that maybe still printing might be
but
a
I think
thing.
you was talking about the idea of a graphic designer as someone who's submissive to a material as well. But as I see it with your lecture, it's you and Willis. at the same time.
Yeah.
So it becomes something else. But when you do this structure of putting things in the different categories, as you told before, then you are restraining yourself, but also making his work something it's not, really, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, in that sense, I have to say also that the lecture format has been very productive, because this also criticism of this first book proposal also came from like discussion in other audiences or like situations like this. So I think it's actually also a way to kind of, I don't know, maybe sharpen a concept, or just to push it a bit further. Well, and if I don't find a millionaire, I would just keep giving the lecture. I mean, that's fine too.
I think Dorinel went somewhere else so he could ask a question. It's not front row. Okay.
Thank you.
Damn it.
Thank you, because I'm asking to excuse me because I'm really eager sometimes, but I forgive my ideas and to make connection to your ideas, because somebody was talking about why to take this work and to take care of this and don't to care about family and what they think on this. But for me, it's really important thing, and it's a part of my research of on the theory of the creation, yes, is that the art objects and their artworks are like our children. They have their own identity, their own life. So it's a kind of virus, actually. The artwork is a kind of virus. You need living organism to give him life. You know, it's half death, half alive. But it's a kind of child.
A host.
A host. You need a host, yes, but you need the artwork is a kind of child. It's like easier to understand. It's a child, and to take care of it. Kafka wanted his books to be burned of his friends. He didn't. You know, everybody knows with Kafka. Huh? It's really pathetic, but he said, burn are my books, my manuscripts. He didn't. He saved them. And the books have their own life. It's inside you. Kafka is inside you with all his fantasies and his visions. The same with Van Gogh. He was miserable. Huh? Somebody took care of them. Rich people, yes? They adopted this and gave them a life. That's why it's not good to hate rich people, because they can serve poor people and give their art a chance and their kids. So this is, remember this, that art probably is a kind of non-living but half-living creature that we have to protect, and it's probably programmed that somebody will take care of it. So it's that this is, and he does, and she does, and the family cannot do this. They couldn't even take care of their children. They split. So rich people in Switzerland, he's a poor people from Estonia probably. He's not a Swiss, rich, the poor Swiss. He's not a rich Swiss people, he's a poor Estonian living in Switzerland. Yeah.
So, for my street credibility, yes, I'm poor.
Okay, last question. Because we can also talk to Urs over beer.
No.
Franz, you have another one.
Yes, I have another one. But maybe first I want to check whether I got it right. You want to publish sections, and you want to publish each section, or you want to make sections, and then in the end, when all the sections are done, you want to publish a book?
Yeah, we have discussed both possibilities, but I think this was an idea that emerged from financial restraints. First of all, that you would just you don't need to save up $30,000, but you could, it's more like almost like a leasing, like a leasing model. Oh, thank you very much. It's very attentive.
Yeah, because
we wouldn't. Then at one moment we also thought, okay, crowdfunding. Then we thought, okay, we could, print a section and release it, and people could buy parts of the book, but also later on the whole book. But then we thought also this is maybe stupid. So at the moment, we're not really clear on this, but I think I would do it like this, that you produce in a certain rhythm, you produce section, but these stay somewhere until you reached the point where you can say, okay, now we're going to put them in an order. I mean, if you want to make a book, sooner or later you have to decide what's the first page, I guess, and what's the last one. And then...
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking, I can understand why why to make sections, but on the other hand, the problem with schizophrenia, for instance, is that we kind of separate it from the person. So we think, okay, they are in this moment, they are another person than they are normally, but they are actually one person. Like they have that schizophrenic part in them. So for me, it would make total sense to have like one book and not just like sections.
Yeah. I understand that, but I think like if you make a movie, you know, like this is just something that is somehow. I mean, of course, you could make a publication that has no specific order. This is what you're saying. This I'm not so much interested in. I think it's still, you know, of course you're editing and you're taking decisions, and at one point you just decide what's the beginning and what's the end and what's in the middle. But I think this is also part of our work. You know, I think for me the question is more that you have to be smart about this and do this well instead of avoiding it with a kind of a bookbinding trick.
Sorry, I arrived a little late, so I'm not sure if you mentioned this argument before, but my question is, do you have any plan to create a market around this artist? Because it's a question. What do you want to do out of the art he left? Because it might be that one day, if you keep on giving lectures, you can get quite a lot of money.
I mean, the market exists, it's just the product that doesn't exist. That's the big problem. And the market exists because he's very well known. There's actually even a person in the audience who has seen him playing live in Chicago. So if you talk to American people, for instance, everybody, they know him. And he has still a huge following there. So actually the market would be there. It's just the product that's missing.
I'm sorry, what about all the drawings? I mean, you could go back to the guy who was buying his drawings at the bank and buy them for cheap. And I mean, I don't want to...
You mean a market for the originals?
Yeah.
This exists also, yeah. There's a gallery in Germany selling those, and I mean, there's, of course, you can also get in contact with the people who own them. Some of them sell, and there's also, if you're lucky, you'll find something on eBay sometimes.
So, just to make it clear, these pieces, they have been produced, they have been bought by galleries, and they are in private collections.
When did you arrive?
Late, 1 minute ago, so very 20 minutes, I would say.
Yeah, I think I can explain it to you later.
Okay, see you.
Sorry.
One last question. I'll give one last question.
Hey, Bardi, you keep saying this.
Okay, done. We take a 10-minute or 5-minute break? 10-minute break, and then we have Ian, who's still alive. How are you? That's good. So Ian, we follow up with Ian after a drink.
Thanks for all the comments.
And a visit to the bathroom. Thank you, people can look at the posters and the zines, which are here.
Ich habe einfach die paar mitgenommen, ich lasse die hier, also
Thank you, the ancient performers of Bremen, for another yet electrifying performance. Thank you to Urs Lenny and the public for the longest Q&A ever in the history of this institute. Next up, we still have a really nice program. Well, first up, we have Ian Linam, followed by dinner, which will be again served in segment 6, or as I would like to call it, segment 6. After that, we have a performance by Maki and Benjamin. After Maki and Benjamin, we have Jabolix and then Giacomo, who I think just arrived. But first, we want to give the floor to Ian Linam, who's a multidisciplinary graphic designer, writer, and critic. He's originally from New York and has degrees in graphic design from Portland State University and the Cal Arts in California. Apart from teaching typography, graphic design, and motion graphics, and Japanese design history in Tokyo, that's quite nice. He's also a writer for Idea magazine in Japan and the Slanted magazine in Germany. So welcome Ian with a nice applause.
Yeah? Okay, it's working. Thank you so much for it. So, I had this really terrible idea for this lecture that was going to involve smoking, and logistically that wasn't possible. So I figured out the next worst thing we could do, and I would like everyone, even the workshoppers in back, please stand up. It's okay, it's all right, it's not people, it's all right. I see you guys in back, it's okay, it's all right. Oh, too cool for school. All right, so what we're going to do is a little workout video.
Hi, I'm Mariko Takahashi. Can you guess who this is? Yes, it's me. You can't believe it, huh? Thanks. But what I want to say here is hope, that anyone could do it. But the point is not only to lose weight. That's likely to fail. The important thing is for you to become strong. If you can build the upper body strength, you can lift things much easier. Beautiful arms showing from your summer dress is not a dream. That's what you want, right? 3 days a week or every other day, we'll be building muscular strength. That's what this video is about. Beauty and strength. This is connected to everything in life. Connected to victory and happiness. Victory and happiness is the most important thing for everyone. Okay, let's go. Pump the arms like you're in the mud. Shoulders down, chest open. Tighten your stomach. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Always slow and strong. 4 more coming. 4, breathe it out. And 3, think it out. It's 2, tighter. Now step aside, outside right here, no arms. With arms, resistance on the up. Good job, guys. We're doing a strength training now. Let's sit down. We're going to start from the military press. Hold your hands up in goal point position. Now let's go. It's up, squeeze in the top and down, again. It's up, squeeze in the top and down again. It's up, squeeze in the top, deep breath out, again. Open your legs. It's up, squeeze and down, again. It's up, squeeze, last one, down. Ready for action, hold it up, squeeze it up, now get it up, take it up. Squeeze the top and press, don't touch it down, don't bag it down. Slow and gently put it up. Come look at this. She's squeezing it down. She's bringing it up, and she's bringing it down. Nice control, nice control. And up. Shoulders down. And up. That's it. We're training the thighs now. And up. Press down. Lift it up. Last one. That's it. Face your front. Up, 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 up. Slow and strong. Down. Up, 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 up. Slow and strong. And down. Thank you for joining. Be well.
Good job, guys. Good job, guys. Oh, hi. So my name's Ian Lynham. I'm an American designer and writer and teacher based in Tokyo. Before I start, I would like to note that there are a few exploitative pictures of women in this presentation. I've included them because I'm critical of them, and we'll explain that criticality of those images along the way. So I just wanted to let you know ahead of time, hence the parental advisor sticker. So this lecture is called Fracture, for a number of reasons. The one, that I've broken my arm twice, skateboarding. In essence, I partially blame the skateboard for my present condition, which is also one of fracture. As a young teenager in the late 1980s, I became obsessed with skateboarding and skateboard videos in particular. These were the skateboard videos which asserted the dominance of street skateboarding, that every person daring to skating where anyone could pick up a skateboard and attack any urban surface as an obstacle course instead of the typically man-made transitioned environments designed solely for the purpose of skateboarding. And these sites of videotaped activity have in essence supplanted, or at the very least, heavily supplemented generations of skateboarders' mental and emotional conceptions of the West in America. And it's this idea of what comprises the West as a driving force that ties together so many disparate locations and sentiments. Libertarian elements of rural Texas, the great marijuana harvests of Northern California, the nude hot springs and occasionally waterlogged immigrant Russian corpses of Oregon, the desolate biker bars of Arizona. Each is a bearer of both mythos and hyperbole, the pillars upon which the banner of the West is slung. The West is a conglomeration, it's a potent, aggregate mixture of tobacco-stained mustaches, sun-faded tattoos, daring feats, the lurking threat of violence, and straight-up fucking lies masquerading as exaggerated bullshit in the search for that which is most elusive, namely, freedom. Freedom is something that I never found in America. I grew up in New York. In 1993, right after the giant earthquake in San Francisco, I moved to California, then to Oregon, then back to California again. And in 2005, I left and I moved to Tokyo, Japan. In Tokyo, I began to cultivate a practice that worked according to its own rules, because as a foreigner residing in Japan, one is usually not expected to do anything correctly anyway. A large majority of the Japanese body public, and I'm very much speaking in stereotypes, are extraordinarily surprised when a foreigner does something correctly, from the near constant praise of one's facility with chopsticks, to social nuances, to just learning to be quiet at appropriate times. Currently, I teach in 3 very different design institutions: a Japanese university, an American graduate school in America, and a Japanese trade school in Tokyo. And these 3 locales are problematized by my position as a white American male living in a Japanese context, but who travels back and forth to the US for work. I am simultaneously a knowingly uber-entitled expatriate, a migrant who travels back to the country where I was raised to teach and lecture a few times a year, and also a minority, though the preferred type to many, white that is, though the American part is also hyper-distressing to others. I live in a country fraught with sociological and psychological fracture due to a history of colonialism and imperialism that ended in occupation, and a reassembly of national governance structures, economic structures, and the general national psyche. Japan is haunted by the myth of being a mono-ethnic nation. It harbors incredibly xenophobic sociological tendencies on the part of its national polity and the general populace in regards to other Asian nations and peoples. It has denied the existence of its indigenous population until a scant 30 years ago. It has done its best to stave off waves of colonial memory that resonate throughout what used to be called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which was the official name for the Japanese Empire. So there's an old Japanese baseball saying which goes something like this. The question is, how do you fuck up the spirit of your team? And the answer is, bring in a foreign player. In this foreign player's perspective, histories are much like nation states. They are mutually agreed upon constructs, and we can use them in counterpoint to tear down assumptions and establish facts. For a number of years now, I've included the example of how Tadanori Yoko's 1965 poster designs destabilized notions of postmodernism magically springing forth in the West in 1977. There were precursors. This type of work showed up 12 years before the term postmodern was starting to be bandied about in graphic design. Japan may have modernized later than much of Europe and North America, but it postmodernized much earlier. History books tend to explain the history of Japanese graphic design almost always through posters. This is largely due to linguistic disconnection. There are parts that are never explained. So this is a poster from 1922, designed by Koshiro and Inoue Makoda. It is selling, surprise, alcohol, but it is also a nationalist alcohol. So this is, it's depicting well, not depicting, it's advertising a form of port wine called the akadama. Akadama means red ball, which is the same symbol, but the name is called the Hinomaru on the Japanese flag. So you guys are all familiar, you know, it's like a white rectangle with a big red circle. So, but it was the first poster to use a Japanese woman for that purpose, as opposed to using images of Western women. And the thing is, this type of context, the socio-political and gender studies context, are missing from nearly every history of Japanese graphic design. And sure, posters offer us something, but perhaps far less than others. This is another exploitative piece of design. This is a weird hybrid, like punk and pornography magazine called Jam, which was designed by the Japanese designer Hikichi Hirata. And it was very strange that you could only purchase it from vending machines. It was not available on newsstands or in bookstores. And Jam was a very strange magazine in that it included writing on anarchism, semiotics, wrestling, mysticism, free music, and pretty heavy literary theory. It was published basically in 1979 and 1980. So knowing about this and so the graphic designer involved, he was very involved in the editorial decisions as much as the design of the content as well. And in short, if you take a project like this and you compare it with a poster, posters tend to be single-pane compositions. They don't offer us much. They don't offer us as much as multi-page compositions. And the content of this magazine was decided upon just as much by the designer. And knowing that these are only a part of the bigger picture of an understanding of a history of a society, a culture, and its design, and its vending machines, I don't know, there's just a lot more there than what we're typically served up as a foreign audience. So before I really dive into the meat of the lecture, I just wanted to dedicate this lecture to the Japanese, Chinese, and Korean students who are present. I had a chance to talk with a bunch of them today, and yeah, it was really, really great. So there are 4 parts to this lecture. The first one is this: disaster, taxonomies, and the rise of modernity. So it's an examination of Japanese design history, modernity, imperialism, and the schizophrenia involved with having been an occupied nation. Obviously, this lecture is already about my own position as an occupant/migrant/expat, but it's mostly about history and explaining how late capitalism manifested itself in Japan and its graphic forms. But first, we have to turn back the clock and talk about something really big, which happened in 1923. Is anyone familiar with what's going on here? No? Okay. So here we have a monkey god. His name is Kashima. And this is a giant catfish which lives underneath all of Japan. And Kashima, the monkey god, his job is to make sure that the catfish stays asleep. He just kind of pets him and just stay asleep. But he fell asleep himself for a little bit, and the giant catfish woke up and basically shook in spasms for between 4 and 10 minutes. And in that time, much of Tokyo was completely destroyed, and that spawned giant firestorms, which took the lives of more than 142,000 people. And this event, though this is obviously the mythological version, this was called the Great Kanto Earthquake of 1923. So here are some promotional images of the authorities keeping the peace in Tokyo. So pretty dynamic layouts for 1923. But what's not, this is basically propaganda for the cops at the end of the day. What's not shown here is the murders of thousands of Korean, Chinese, and ethnically Chinese and Korean Japanese, as well as anarchists, communists, and other political radicals played out by both citizenry and the police themselves. And this imagery here reifies the idea of the police as a pro-social force, despite what actually happened. And the earthquake and the resultant chaos helped serve as an impetus for pro-social or positive upheaval as well, particularly in certain quarters of design and art in Tokyo. Notably within an art collective which had publicly debuted a month before the quake, and it was called Mavo, M-A-V-O, and it was led by a gentleman named Murayama Tomoyoshi, who was a Japanese designer, artist, playwright, novelist, and drama producer. Murayama had studied in Germany and supported the challenge by Dada and the merits to integrate culture, politics, and everyday life. The group, which had a shifting membership between like 8 and 14 people, they had a journal as well, and these are examples of the covers of their journal. And these are very interesting in that it's a mixture of offset printing, as well as here we have a lino cut, essentially a rubber stamp. And here we have 2 covers of the same issue, yet collage is integrated into them. So very beautiful. And Murayama Tomoyoshi, he coined the movement that Mavo worked under, conscious constructivism. So he was initially drawn to constructivism as typified by the work of Kandinsky, but he later became dissatisfied with the detachment that constructivists felt from society. He was very interested in trying to provoke concrete associations between art and life. So the Mavoists were also designers as well. They were artists and they designed their own projects, but they also designed for other people as well. On the left is a 1925 cover for a literary journal called Bunge Jidai 2. This is issue number 4. And on the right is a flyer for an exhibition of plastic art in 1925. So Murayama Tomoyoshi married his wife Kazuko in 1925. I really love this photo of them because of their matching hair. It's really cool. And they look really happy here. And while appearing happy, Murayama was a political agitator, a playwright, an activist, and he would participate in many pro-social yet politically radical activities throughout his lifetime. He spent years in prison, years in exile, and finally he arrived back at home in Japan, happy. This is a magazine cover that he designed in 1947, years later after the war. And please take a look at the display lettering in use here. This is a design from 3 years ago in Tokyo by Daijiro Ohara. And what we see is this still like steady influence of historical lettering design and typography still today. And that's one thing, it's conscious in terms of being referential, yet it lacks the political drive that older work had. So stepping back from now to the 1920s, so this is a magazine called Affiche, and Affiche was Japan's first true graphic design magazine. It was published from 1927 to 1930. On the left is the first issue, and on the right is the second. And I show you these in order to introduce another designer. Affiche was primarily a visual magazine, which was devoted to typologies and taxonomies of work. So here on the left we have, this was in the days before fire engines. If there was a fire, a group of people would push a giant cart with a water barrel on it, and there would be a man in front who would be announcing the impending firefighters, and they would have a pole, and the pole would be topped with these decorative headers here on the left. And on the right, we have a study of vernacular typography from this time. And these were put together by this man, Kon Wajiro. And Wajiro was a contemporary of Murayama. He was an architect and designer, and when the Great Kanto earthquake happened, basically many buildings in Tokyo were destroyed. And separately, Kon and his team, and Murayama and his team, were going around constructing makeshift barracks, structures for people to live in. And they were then decorating those barracks in very early avant-garde styles. So, and it's quite interesting that these two men's lives would intersect in the future. So, Kon, like the Great Kanto earthquake greatly affected Kon's activities. And the first thing that caught his eyes as he surveyed the scene of destruction after the quake were just kind of the materials that could potentially be abstracted from the rubble. And he started drawing detailed sketches of these products of human ingenuity. And he realized that this was the moment when Tokyo was actually destroyed, that Tokyo would actually become itself modern. And he created, with a few other people, a science of this modernization. And he used Esperanto, the international language, and he called it modernologio, or modernology, faux Latin. So Kon's work captures moments of life in the aftermath of a natural disaster. So on one hand, the documents are simple snapshots of post-earthquake Tokyo that peer into the meager domestic spaces of the affected population. But the focus, however, is on the worn materiality of everyday life. Rather than the makeshift structures or architecture proper, Kon's implicit idea was that the designed space says very little about those who live here. Its objects, its slippers, its trash, its utensils, its chipped bowls, the tools that are strewn across these sketches. Instead, these are more telling of people's economic and cultural life at that time. So he created a number of taxonomies of people as well as these objects. So for example, here's the social class composition of pedestrians in 1925 in an area called Fukugawa. Here's the household, the newly married couple. This is the inside of a closet in 1925. And this is illustrations of what a man in Fukugawa wants, and in counterpoint, illustrations of what a woman needs. So always hyper-privileging the men over the women. So, besides its value as a historical record, his work presents us with a great example of a marriage between design and ethnography. Having been trained as a designer, he was more than capable of being able to draw accurately, from life. But not even photography would be capable of capturing what he drew by hand. And his work could be compared to that of Owen Jones, the gentleman who wrote The Grammar of Ornament. But rather than just illuminating the singular and the idiosyncratic, he attempted to reveal the deeper structures of human practice and the way that humans reorder the material world, the unity of making do and making sense of a world that's gone awry. And Kon's work presents to us a method of design analysis at its best. Here's one of his taxonomies of people sleeping on the street in Tokyo after the quake. And this is a taxonomy of the kind of clothing worn in the street by women in 1924. This is one about the wear and tear of people's clothing. And of course, an analysis of hairstyles. And the thing is, he didn't just do this for a couple of years, he did this for decades and decades. Here he documented the entire contents of a Tokyo apartment. And here are the uniforms of staff at assorted beer halls in the Shinjuku area of Tokyo. And he didn't just talk about the clothing people wore. Here, he's documenting how the shape of people's shoes actually changed their bodies, like physiologically, objects changing us as humans. And he chronicled what he ate as well. So this is basically proto-food blogging as well. So he set the trend there. He also analyzed how people actually physically read books. He did like a 200-page book about how people read books. and he mapped how people moved through physical spaces in time, and how living spaces were built and arranged. So just a really, really thorough documentation of post-war life. And he published 2 very hard-to-find books on these topics, and I don't know, by all accounts, he was a very, very happy man, despite having lived through hell. I don't know, just his story, he helped explain how Tokyo became a modern city, and today's Tokyo is built on the foundations of fracture. Modernity played itself out in different ways in Japan in regard to gender roles. So a large part of this was based on consumer products. So this is a visual example of how Japanese consumer products looked the way they did before the quake. This being a brand of soap called Cow soap. So, you know, we've got a little like Art Nouveau happening here. We've got a little bit of French influence in the typography, a little bit of British influence in the typography as well. There are also some Chinese elements. So this is very classical Japanese design. And this is Cow soap after the quake, looking much more modern. This is what it looks like now, which is pretty terrible. I just wanted to throw that in there and show you guys that it's still there. It's just awful. So Cow soap was incredibly popular, as were products created by the Shiseido Corporation, a manufacturer of soap and cosmetics that is still around today. So this is a 1930s film clip from Shiseido, from their archives, which captures a Shiseido promotional event in an area called Ginza in Tokyo. And the Ginza is the very fancy shopping district. And here we have a bunch of women. They were called parasol girls because they're carrying parasols or umbrellas. And the parasols are emblazoned with the Shiseido logo. So you'll notice in the background, most of the women are wearing kimono, traditional Japanese dress. But we have these modern girls dressed in Western clothing with short bobbed hair, sometimes kind of wavy or turned. And they're out there basically selling soap and cosmetics as being the image of the new woman in Tokyo. So basically, so this idea of the modern girl was very, very, very important in the 1920s and 1930s. So there's a term for these women in Japanese. So modern girls were known as moga, M-O-G-A, so moga. And the popular conception of modern girls, or moga, was that they cut their hair to look like movie stars. They wore fashionable Western-style clothing, like those women. They smoked, they drank cocktails, and generally lived cosmopolitan lifestyles. Here is a magazine cover for Shiseido's in-house marketing magazine portraying a moga, or modern girl. And the idea of the modern girl was anachronous, or really not in step, to previous conceptions of women in Japan. The moga was a cafe dweller, or in reality, usually a cafe employee who survived on tips and did not make very much money and was usually half starving. And the moga's westernized appearance suggested sexual liberation, which was something very both appealing to certain people and very scary to others. And because the traditional Japanese woman is typified as being a strong, proud mother, an obedient daughter, and a loyal wife. Those were the only 3 possibilities offered. But the moga brought something else into play. So these 2 perceptions really clashed greatly in the 1930s. And society just can't transform itself from being feudal to being autonomous overnight. And while the numbers of women who were in modern dress increased, they were really dwarfed by the number of women in traditional clothing. So the moga were actually pretty rare. So this is a drawing, again, by Kon Wajiro. This is an image, it's a 1925 survey from Ginza again, where he analyzed the pedestrian population and looked at what they were wearing in terms of Western clothing versus traditional clothing. And a lot of we have these ideas that, Japan really became modern at that time in terms of conceptions of women, but not so much. Women were really wearing much more traditional clothing than Western or, quote, modern clothing at that time. It was primarily men who wore Western clothing. So this is a painting called Tipsy by Kobayakawa Kiyoshi. And it represents the danger of metropolitan femininity. And it was something that was simultaneously idealized, romanticized, and discouraged as women entered the public sphere as something other than the pre-modern roles of wife, mother, daughter. And the means through which the modern girl entered the public sphere was largely through advertising, and largely through the work of one designer. So this is Japan's first real superstar designer. His name was Yamana Hayao, and he lived from 1897 to 1980. And he was a designer and art director for Shiseido Cosmetics. He joined their cosmetics department at the end of 1928. And Shiseido was and still is a juggernaut in the Japanese economy. It's huge. It dominates makeup and cosmetics and healthcare products. Not healthcare, soap and things you clean yourself with. So, and it was formed right before Japan opened up to the West after 200 years of isolation. So these are cosmetic products which were designed by Hayao for the company. And he was the rare type of person, these are not signed, but he signed a lot of his design work using his letters in Latin letter forms, A-Y, A-O. And people really got to know him and his work because of that. He really defined the company's early house style of advertising, utilizing a mix of Art Deco, Arabesque, Baroque, and minimal modern design treatments for packaging, advertisements, and publications. And they focused on slightly abstracted female forms, delicate Gothic lettering, geometric elements, and holographic flourishes. And because of working with Shiseido, in 2 years, he really became incredibly popular with the public. And after that 2 years, he was like, yeah, I'm famous. Fuck you, Shiseido, I quit. And they were like, oh, bye. And then he left, and then 2 years later, he was like, oh, I'm broke. Can I have my job back? And they were like, okay. And then he kept doing that, like 2 years on working at Shiseido, and then he would quit, and then he'd go back, and then quit, and then go back. And that really defined his whole career. Not his whole career, but most of it. So Idea magazine, Japan's oldest graphic design magazine, it had a predecessor, which was called Kokokukai, or Advertising World, or Publicity World. And a design critic wrote, basically noted Ayao's popularity with the general populace, who really, like most people don't know who graphic designers are unless their friend's a graphic designer now. And this critic wrote that, quote, Yamana has been so famous amongst non-designers, having signed all of his design work, that we can almost believe that there are young ladies out there who believe that they will become modern girls if they simply take a piece of paper and write out the letters A-Y-A-O, and then swallow that piece of paper. So that kind of helped define how women's roles were changed through graphic design in the early 1920s and mid-1920s. But modernity played out differently in Japan in regards to aspects of imperialist military propaganda. So it's worth noting Japan's place in the global scheme since opening up to the world. So within 100 years, they've engaged in military effort after military effort. They've colonized other nations and extended their sphere of influence across Asia. So it's important to note a few moments here. So Japan won the Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and in essence annexed Korea into its sphere of influence. It invaded Taiwan in 1895, thus sparking 5 decades of colonial rule. And Japan defeated the Russian Army and Navy in 1905, a feat which really surprised the world. So this idea of like Japan, this very small country, continually going up against other nations and winning is very, very surprising. And I'd like to show you guys some examples of propaganda from that time. So this is a poster which reads basically, your labor makes Japanese business strong. Promote the industrial economy of free and occupied territories. And here, images of smokestacks, images of industry, are overlaid on the red areas of Asia that Japan had annexed into the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. So the industrial propaganda message here is to support Japanese industry as well as expansionism, because like business and the government were hand in hand. So this is a poster for Mitsubishi. Prior to becoming the car company we all know and love, they produced the warplanes for Japan's assorted war efforts. And this reads, the whole nation is a battlefield, let's take it to the sky. This one reads, we can't lose him, the boss's life is the most important. This one reads, factories are part of the military, we also have military discipline. This is basically an industry equals patriotism poster. And this is just a straight up propaganda poster. It reads, "Let's build a unified world. With every war, the hope of the Japanese Navy gets larger. Unite the 7 seas." So these posters called also to protect the body of the people in the wartime. This is a poster to stop the spread of tuberculosis at that time, and to keep the national body itself fit and ready for war. This literally reads, "Train your body for war." And here we have, the soldier, but also the children preparing themselves for war in the future. And the work today, I just showed you all those images, but I didn't talk about who designed them. Because a lot of the time, the authors of propaganda from history, it's often stripped away, right? So Yamana Ayao, the designer for Shiseido, he was also creating those types of posters, shown here. And it's something ignored in Japan itself as well as abroad often, this idea of analyzing history. And many historical designers of note's works during wartime have been glossed over, redacted from official histories, or just included without real socio-political analysis. So Ayao was also the art director of a magazine called Nippon. Nippon was a magazine created in Japan, but it was not written or produced in Japanese. It was produced in 12 other languages. And it was underwritten by corporate sponsors such as Shiseido and Mitsubishi. And Yamana Ayao was the art director of this magazine. It was the first time anyone had been called an art director in Japan. The cover on the left is significant. We saw the images of his illustrations of women earlier, and they were women that looked quite Western. And here we see a shift to more traditional representations of women in illustration. The difficulty in understanding much of design history is the insistent reliance upon the role of art directors and designers, and not acknowledging the often unified engagement that creative laborers have with the content at hand. Sure, this magazine was beautifully designed, but it was also the propaganda mouthpiece for an imperialist nation state. This is probably, for me, the most troubling issue of Nippon. It was devoted to occupied Manchuria, also called Manchukuo in Japanese. And the text within states, in Manchuria, with Manchurians as the core, the Mongolians, Koreans, Japanese, White Russians, and various other races combined in mutual harmony to carry on agriculture. But what was really happening was a lot of germ warfare and the systematic killing of prisoners of war. And perhaps the most disgusting thing about this image, and I know I'm being very subjective in judging it, is this guy right here. So this is the publisher of this magazine, and he's dressed in Manchurian costume and pointing out the beauty and harmony that's happening. Yeah, it's rough. His name was Natori Yonosuke, and Japan's top #2 photography prize is named after him today. His history of propaganda is, in essence, been stripped away from history. So this is the very last piece of graphic design that I've been able to locate from Japan prior to the end of World War II. Basically, these posters were printed, and it says kind of official news, and it's got the date in red, but then the black is all handwritten. And this reads, "The imperial government conveys, enemy planes have been repelled, we have strong defenses." So here we have just a whole bunch of really strong propaganda, right, that shows the nature of imperialism in Japan at that time. So, which leads us to the fourth and last part of this lecture, the post-war bit. So, Japan has two religions, both Buddhism and another one called Shinto. Shinto has a bunch of flavors, but one of them is state Shinto. It's also called Koka Shinto. The idea of Koka is like kind of an imagined dream world of the nation. And the Emperor of Japan used the ideology of Shinto, which was a native folk tradition, which was animist. And basically the pre-war government made a religion into a non-religious moral tradition and patriotic practice, which emphasized the essence, the emperor as being a divine being. So the emperor as being God. And this is called the kamon, or seal of the emperor. And shrines at that time were kind of redefined by law as being places for patriotism, not places for worship, and it changed things a lot. And really institutionalized the religion as state ideology, and the emperor as the divine leader of the nation. So, in contrast, immediately post-war, here we have General MacArthur meeting the Emperor Hirohito for the first time after Japan admitted defeat. Not long after the Emperor went on the radio, and he admitted to the people, the first time they ever heard his voice, that he was not God, or he was not descended of God. He himself was human by allowing people to hear his voice. So, U.S. military leaders, basically, they looked at this idea of state Shinto, or state-controlled religion, and they were like, you can't do that anymore, so that's got to end. And that previous symbol, this is something that is only allowed to be used by the emperor and the imperial family. Were I to show this presentation in Japan, I would be breaking the law, so don't tell anybody. That's also like, I was asked if people could record this lecture, and I was like, nah, that's largely because of that. So, yeah. And the thing is, like, that symbol is really powerful, and it's been appropriated by a ton of contemporary subcultures. It's really intriguing that, I don't know, this idea of, like, basically imperialist religion and the emperor itself is just applied by youth culture. So these are basically motorcycle gangs. They're called bosozoku. And they've historically kind of operated as feeders into the Yakuza. But usually it's just like young dudes driving their motorcycles around really, really loud. They modify the carburetors and the exhaust system. So instead of it sounds like it's really, really loud. And often bosozoku uniforms feel like the postmodern versions of traditional garb, combining working class attire with highly ornamented attire and making sure that there's always a reference to the emperor within the clothing. And yeah, here's another example. And also by showing these images, I would also be breaking the law in Japan because they've got the common symbol in there. So there are also rightist gangs, or they're kind of extreme nationalist, right-wing people who are often staffed by Yakuza. And if you're not familiar, Yakuza is the Japanese mafia. And not just the Yakuza, but also others on the criminal fringe. And you see them driving these black vans. It's very common to see them throughout Japan. And these modern ultranationalists are often the nation's most notorious violators of the public peace. So they wear helmets and like battle fatigues and sunglasses, and they drive around in these trucks which are often plated in steel, and they have these giant loudspeakers on top which you cannot ignore. And they're constantly blaring music in all directions and asking for like very strident anti-communist measures, the repeal of the Constitution, a crash military buildup, and a restoration of the dignity of the Japanese race. And while some of them are formal members of the Yakuza, many are not. And like a lot that they're used by the Yakuza a lot of the time for kind of odd jobs and also for harassing people. So basically you can pay these guys about $1,000 and they could pull up in front of Schizotopia and just blare us with stuff and just annoy us, and basically someone would call the police because of the sound complaints, yeah, things like that. So it's pretty rough. And the thing is, often it's hard to distinguish like who is the mafia and who are these guys. It's really it's confusing. And in opposition to this, so like we have these like bad boys using this nationalist imagery, but here's the imperial family themselves, and they look so nice. You know, like this is a photo from their official calendar. So on New Year's,
snapshot.
I'm sorry.
It's a snapshot.
No, this is a professional photograph. So every New Year's Day, the emperor makes a public address, and for the past decade, the greatest number of attendees that come and see him speak live, they're overwhelmingly gay. Most see the address not as a symbol of empire and imperialism or past imperial glory, but instead as a symbol of camp and novelty. And with Yakuza and bosozoku, the motorcycle gangs and the right-wing gangs, and all those people not present, this opens a giant perspective on the fracture of contemporary Japanese society. So here we have a family of superhumans who are supposedly directly descended from gods, but they've been forced to renounce their own godhoods. Then there are those who outright reject the sacred nature of government control. This is the seal or common for the police forces of Japan. And this is the cover for a 2002 calendar, which was designed by this guy. I love his photo here. It's been beaten up. Matsumoto Gento was born in 1961, and he runs a company called the Saru Brunei, or the Sultan of Brunei, or also the Monkey of Brunei. And he's been extensively involved in art direction for ads and books and all kinds of stuff. And he has a little video game company, and he's a really sweet guy. Yeah, and he does not like the coughs. And I don't know, I just thought we could take a look at this calendar. Here he's taken the official seal of the police and overprinted it on the police. So basically taking the official Japanese police calendar and repurposing it. So overprinting the faces with the symbol of oppression for which a lot of people, including himself, believe they stand. And they sit, and they jump, and they surveil. So Gento is one of my favorite designers because he really doesn't care about anything other than just surviving. He's done stints in prison, he's gotten in trouble with clients, and he just generally seems unrepentant about all of it. And then he kind of like stuck the common or the Japanese police symbol on the ass of a dog, plugging up the asshole, suggests his general attitude toward the police. I find this really interesting. So, in conclusion, I kind of think of all this as like a very surface skim survey of the fracture of both Japanese national psyche and how it's represented through graphic objects, but also of my own experiences post-California. I escaped the West and somehow fulfilled American notions of manifest destiny by going so far west that I wound up in the East. It's a form of slippage from one empire to another, where post-coordinates interdependencies are viscerally exposed, and one can never fully integrate if one is a foreigner. It's a place where I could carve out a life on my own terms, because no one expects me to do anything right anyways. It was largely in the cultural context of Tokyo that my own true inner radicalism matured and flourished, and where I discovered exactly why I was always disappointed by the vaporous aroma of what is offered in the American West. It's a place, Tokyo, where foreigners find refuge from the terror of their upbringings. Tokyo is where I can live as a damaged, sometimes crazy, radical feminist internationalist, because it actually means something there. People like me are few and far between, but we find each other, the returnees, the post-conks, the theory maniacs, and those who deny that subculture is merely an aggregation of micro-markets. It's a place where I can help students, many of whom are struggling to figure out their own place in a schizophrenic nation, to understand that we can individually and collectively carve out a liminal other way forward, despite the unrelenting social pressure of living in Japan. And the thing is, Tokyo and Japan are different. I love Tokyo. I do not love Japan, though I find it immensely interesting in regards to history. Japan to me is fracture. It's a nation which took over all of Asia, or much of Asia. It lost it all, and has since turned inward, pondering and shouting its schizophrenic place in history, denying exactly how damaged it is, just like me. So I was biking to work the other day, and the emperor actually drove by, and he waved at me. And I winked at him as I took his photo with my phone, and he laughed, and I laughed, because we both know who we are.
Hey, Dorina, why are you sitting in the back? Dorina, Dorina, Maki, Dorina. I'm sorry, guys, for everything. Dorina, do you have a question?
No questions, actually.
I would like to give the mic to you. I'm sorry.
Hey, somebody in the audience have questions about it. It's really cool. It's much cooler than Mr. Pickwick.
Come in the front.
Yeah, no.
Because now I would like to feel that.
Okay, I will have to do this. My version of Japan, if one, my mother-in-law is Japanese. Actually, if you want to know my life, I will tell you.
You have to go to the.
My mother-in-law is actually from Japan, so I talk with this private.
to sit in the front? Okay, does anyone in the back have a question? How about I have a question. The Jam magazine, was it only in English? Or both?
Jam? No, it was in Japanese.
Because all the titles were in English.
Yeah, in Japan, English is often used as, there's a word flinky. Flinky means atmosphere. So, if you see like kitty near, like in it's all in English, that's just atmosphere. If you actually read it, it's kind of rough.
So it's like, it was kind of like a Playboy. Because a lot of people always look at Playboy as a magazine for articles.
Right.
If you want to go sit in the back, I'll bring the microphone to you. If you sit in the back, I'll come. I promise.
I'm just to tell you that I not do as moderator says, but I have a duty to make you also speak. Actually, I'm really, really embarrassed because those young students and really curious don't have the possibility to put questions. Now you have the possibility, so just do it. The microphone is free. I do it just because to warm up, So, somebody wants to put a question? The microphone is here. My mother-in-law is from Japan, and my kids are quarter Japanese, half Romanian, and quarter Swedish. So, this is my vision. And the only comment I want to do is that you told that the design of a butter or something was ugly, you didn't like it? Yeah, you told bad about Japanese design, contemporary design. The soap design, so this is ugly. Yeah? What's ugly, yeah? Because I don't like people speaking bad about Japan. You do this. And I feel that you don't consider the time. Imagine 50 years in the future, you will think this was really cool design from the 2018. Yeah? So you have to travel back and forth. Yeah. Imagine in the future.
Bro, I can definitively say in 100 years nobody's going to think this is fucking cool. Like, this is rough.
Yes, but the crap you show after the war, you showed some crap. You see, this was cool because it was old. Yeah. Understand my point?
It's okay. What are you doing? Okay, Serena has a
Well, first of all, thanks for this lecture, Ian. It's amazing. And the question I had was, you mentioned that you couldn't show this lecture in Japan because of the symbol of the emperor. Got that correct? But besides that, like, would you do the same lecture as you did it here in Japan?
Yes.
And how was the reaction?
I have not.
But you would do it. And it's not something. Just because you mentioned that I don't like the design. I don't know his name that did the Shiseido design, kind of like that. He also did these propaganda posters. Like, how much is this known, or is this something that is discussed in the design community in Japan?
It's really difficult in Japan in terms of design history, Japanese graphic design history. I think I teach one of the only classes, and that's problematic. This place is white. That's not good, So there's a lack of understanding of history, but then there's a ton of publishing around Japanese design history. So I don't know. I don't think that would be problematic. I think that the difficult thing is, like, here's an American talking about Japanese design history. So there's the possibility for people to be like, oh, the Americans being that's not it. Like, they're going to live there and be thoroughly engrossed with the culture. So.
Do you have a question?
No, it's true. Now the microphone should be louder. Now the louder. There is a question. Technical problem.
Yeah, you showed these motorcycle gangs, and they also have the symbol of the emperor on their jackets. Yeah. And you said it's not okay for you to show the images.
It's also not okay for them.
Okay.
Yeah. They're totally breaking the law.
said that you will. You said you won't be integrated ever. But do you think that there is a political movement at the moment about the opening the country? You got 2020 with the Olympics, and also I've heard of the sort of tourism as one of the main priorities now. Can you say something about this? That in a way, because it's very protected geographically, but also in many ways. But if they open it, then it's different.
So I moved to Japan 14 years ago. I think my mic's not working. So
should be louder.
So I moved to Japan 14 years ago, and at that time it was incredibly hard to get a visa to work in Japan as a foreigner, unless you could find meaningful, stable work. Whereas now it's really easy to get a visa as a freelancer. But then also there's been a kind of clandestine push for a lot of employment, especially from of people from South America, Central America, and throughout Asia in Japan, because Japan has a declining population. So, which a lot of people are just like, oh, the Japanese don't make enough babies, but that's not true. During World War II, a lot of people starved. So there was an unofficial policy that basically people should have less kids after the war. And that's what led to the decline of the population. It's not that people aren't having sex, they're just not having enough children. So in order to combat that, Japan has to bring in more labor. However, the PR line for the government is that they do not want immigration. Yet, in the past 5 years, they've opened up immigration laws immensely. When I moved to Japan, there were about maybe 20 foreign graphic designers working in Tokyo. Now there are about 250, 300. So and that's just graphic design. So, does that answer?
And how about the other way around? Because in a way we don't really know so much in Europe about graphic design. Even Idea magazine would constantly have another issue about reels. And so apart from those 5 main names, it seems that there's you're talking about Western graphic designers going there, but the other way doesn't seem to be.
It happens, but it's less rare. I mean, there's not a great insistence upon foreign language education, and then the foreign language education that does exist is not so great for a lot of people, so there's that. But then, I don't know, it's the linguistic disconnection that's the hardest thing, because there aren't enough people writing about Japanese design getting it into the West. So, it's not that even things get lost in translation, it's just that nothing's translated in the first place. So that's why we only know those 5 people.
Hello, thanks for a good, very interesting lecture. I have a question about pornography, because I think the cooperation with Playboy, for instance, is we feel that all the world have the same view on sex and has had, and sex is very something obviously very strange in the US. Whereas, I mean, in Japan you have this shunga, the wood printings from the 19th century, and they seem to imply that women has had a more free kind of access to sex than women in Europe and obviously America at that time. Is that true?
That's a really loaded question.
Can you grab the microphone?
Sorry. Okay, sorry, buddy. So the first real exhibition of shunga only happened a couple years ago in Japan. The first real show of shunga. So, but the thing is, historically, pre-Westernization, I mean, there are mixed accounts in terms of women's agency sexually. So, there was a practice called yobai, and yobai is when, if you saw a partner that was desirable, perhaps you would slip under the cover.
And yeah, as it was brought up by you before, it goes one way, like Western is going there, or some roots that are somewhat typical for Japanese graphic design, or is there a way of like finding its own identity to a certain degree?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, Japanese design has so many of its own elements in terms of typography. So the word orthography, how we write and why we write, which direction. So Japanese can be left to right, right to left, up and down. The types of the forms, the ornamentation of certain types of typefaces, and then lettering, the history, rich history of manga, anime, ukiyo-e printmaking. I mean, the Japanese graphic arts were around for centuries before graphic design was, with the introduction of movable type. I mean, we all see Japanese stuff, and we know it's Japanese, right? Yeah. But it's an interesting question, because the thing is, like, with Japanese things from Japan came to the West, but then those got imported back and came back into Japanese commercial design as well.
Thank you so much for this. Really, I really appreciated your talk, and I think it can also teach us a lot about research, like actual research, not just superficial. What's the difference between looking at something superficially and really sort of understanding the roots of like a visual culture, or like the place we live in. In your case, it's for me, of course, much more exotic because it's a culture I'm not familiar with. I have a question. I would really like you to sort of connect what you announced in the beginning, exploitative imagery of women on Jam Magazine in particular, but I think we are all aware that there's a very specific way of how women are sexualized, or maybe also sort of perform themselves certain kind of types of roles. I think that is much more, that's very specific for me, very Japanese thing. And to how you would link that to, or is there a link to the change of like femininity, or the impact on feminine culture through modernity and a sort of time shift, and what will happen when that happened in relation, in comparison with Europe, for example. Did I make sense?
Yeah, this is a really big question. I think I very intentionally showed, not this. I mean, those images of the modern girl, or moga, was the first hypersexualization and feminization, not making feminist, but to make more feminine of women in terms of modernity. I mean, there were tons and tons of paintings and prints at that time where the woman was really, put forth as a sexual object, the lone woman, as opposed to in Shunga, women and men, or men and men, and women engaged in sexual acts. So just that shift from, people engaged in sex to the lone woman being objectified. I mean, that's a large part of it. But I mean, that's like, just the answer could go on for days and days in terms of that. So, I mean, it's difficult because like, Japan has had waves of feminism, but I mean, you could say they're not really waves, they're more like ripples in terms of within the public consciousness. So, it's problematic. So as a Westerner, and that's the thing, like, historians always come to these things with stereotypes. They often won't talk about their bias, and that's something that I try to face all the time.
I'm happy to announce that after 36 hours of traveling, the Karlsruhe group has arrived. Okay, no more questions. We go to dinner. Yes, I'm starving. You're probably also starving. And the dinner is on the 4th floor, which is at the cafe, where you probably got coffee earlier, the Cafe Loop. So enjoy dinner, and then we come back here for Maki and Benjamin.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.